My mom chose her creepy boyfriend over me, so I took them both down. My mom thought she could just delete my father from my life and replace him with her creepy new boyfriend. She wanted me to call this man Brandon, Dad, as if the real one was just a forgotten character in a story she was rewriting. The funny thing is, she had no idea I was still talking to him, that my actual dad and I had a secret line of communication she couldn't touch. Her ignorance was her biggest mistake, and it was about to cost her everything. I was 13 when my mom got engaged to Brandon. It was a whirlwind, the kind of thing that leaves you dizzy and sick to your stomach. My real dad had been convicted of manslaughter just 5 months earlier. It never made any sense. The whole thing was a blur of flashing lights and confusion. We were at the bar where he worked part-time. He wasn't even drinking, he had just finished his shift. I was sitting at a booth near the back, working on homework and drinking a soda, waiting for him to drive me home. I remember he went into the bathroom, and when he came out just a few minutes later, his face was pale, panicked, and his shirt was covered in blood. He yelled for someone to call the police, his voice raw with a terror I'd never heard before. They arrived so quickly, and without saying much of anything, they slammed him against a wall, put him in handcuffs, and took him away. The next time I saw him, it was through a thick pane of glass with a phone receiver pressed to my ear. It just didn't add up. My dad didn't have a violent bone in his body. He was the guy who would catch spiders in the house and release them outside, the guy who cried during sad movies. He swore up and down that he didn't do it, that he had found the man already bleeding out. And the way my mom acted after his conviction, it made me even more suspicious. She didn't grieve. She didn't fight. She just moved on. Almost immediately. She brought Brandon home the week after the sentencing. On day one, she sat me down and announced, "He's your new dad. The other one is clearly a monster." She told me my dad was a killer, and for my own safety, I needed to cut him out of my life completely. At first, I was just a confused kid. My world had been shattered, and I didn't know what to believe. But 5 months later, when Mom flashed a gaudy diamond ring and told me they were engaged, that I needed to start calling Brandon Daddy, something inside me hardened. The last of my childish naivety crumbled into dust, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that my dad was innocent. It was around that time that Brandon's true colors started to show. He got comfortable. He'd stare at me during dinner, his chewing slow and deliberate, a weird little smile on his face. He'd say things like, "You're growing up so fast, becoming such a pretty young woman." His eyes would linger in a way that made me want to take a shower. The worst part? My mom thought it was sweet. She'd giggle and say, "Oh, Brandon, you're making her blush." I wasn't blushing. I was fighting the urge to vomit. The first time I tried to tell her, I waited until we were alone in the car. I told her that Brandon made my skin crawl, that the way he looked at me wasn't right. She just sighed and told me I was being dramatic, that I was just acting out because I miss my dad. But she must have told him what I said. Of course she did. That night, long after she was asleep, my bedroom door creaked open. Brandon came in and stood over my bed. Before I could even scream, he grabbed my wrist, his fingers digging into my skin so hard they left deep, purple marks. "You know what happens to naughty girls who snitch," he whispered, his voice a low hiss. The smell of stale beer was on his breath. I was terrified, frozen in my bed, but I knew then and there that my mom was not a safe harbor. I couldn't trust her. So, I kept it a secret. That wasn't the only secret I started keeping. I began writing letters to my dad. I'd scribble them out on loose-leaf paper during study hall, pouring out all my fears and frustrations. I'd hide them between the pages of my history textbook and mail them from my friend Ashley's house after school so the return address wouldn't be ours. Dad would write back through the prison's email system, sending messages to a secret account I'd created. His words were my lifeline, a reminder of the man he really was, full of love and encouragement and the constant, desperate refrain. I didn't do this. Things got really bad one Thursday. I came home from school, and Mom was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers, looking pleased with herself. She informed me that she'd changed my last name on all my school records to Brandon's. Without asking me. Without even telling me beforehand. "You'll thank me when you're older," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. That night, Brandon came into my room to celebrate being a real family now. He sat on the edge of my bed, the mattress dipping under his weight, making me feel trapped. He put his clammy hand on my thigh and squeezed. "You should be grateful to have a dad who cares so much," he said, his voice slick and oily. I shoved his hand off and scrambled to the other side of the bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. I locked myself in the bathroom until I heard him finally leave my room. I wrote to Dad about it that night, my tears smudging the ink on the page. The letter I got back from him wasn't an email. It was on real, thin prison issue paper, sent to Ashley's address. Parts of the letter were damp and the ink had bled, making the paper almost see-through in spots. It looked like he had cried while writing it. That nearly broke me. Seeing his pain, His helplessness turned my own fear into a cold, hard resolve. There was one thing I still hoped for, though, a chance to see him. His birthday was coming up. I remember working up the courage for days to ask Mom if I could visit him in prison. I tried to be reasonable. "I know you don't like him," I said, keeping my voice steady, "but it's his birthday. Just for a few minutes. Please." The answer, of course, was no. But it was worse than just no. She told me we couldn't go because, in a stunning coincidence, Brandon had gotten tickets to a car show that exact weekend, and he expected us all to go together as a family. He had specifically requested adjoining hotel rooms. My stomach twisted into a knot of pure dread. When I told them I'd rather visit my own father than look at old cars with them, Mom exploded. "He's a killer." "You are not visiting a murderer," she screamed, her face red and blotchy. When I screamed back, "He's innocent, and he's still my dad," Brandon stepped forward and backhanded me across the face. The sting was sharp and shocking, but what hurt more was seeing my mom just stand there and watch. She said nothing. Not a single word in my defense. I was forced to go on that trip. And that weekend, in that sterile, soulless hotel room, the worst happened. I woke up to the feeling of the mattress dipping beside me. Brandon had snuck in from the adjoining room. He was drunk, his breath hot and foul. This time, he didn't just grab my thigh. His hand went higher, under the waistband of my pajama shorts. I had never felt so disgusting, so violated and humiliated in my entire life. I froze, pretending to be asleep until he finally stumbled out. I lay there for hours, shaking, feeling utterly broken. The week we got home, my life imploded. My mom was cleaning my room and found the stack of letters from Dad I had hidden under my mattress. She didn't just read them. She took them into the backyard and burned them in the barbecue pit, a sick little smile on her face as she watched my only connection to him turn to ash. As punishment for daring to communicate with him, she took my bedroom door off its hinges. "For monitoring," she said. "No privacy. No safety." Of course, Brandon loved this. He would stand in the empty doorway at night, a dark silhouette against the hall light, just watching me. Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for what felt like hours. That was my breaking point. The next day, I snuck into the school library after hours and poured everything out in a frantic, rambling email to Dad. I told him everything: the hotel, the door, Brandon watching me sleep. I typed for an hour, my fingers flying across the keyboard, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know what I expected him to do. He was in prison. He was helpless. I was helpless. 2 weeks later, a reply came. It was long, full of the comforting things a father should say, promising that somehow, everything was going to be okay. But one sentence stood out, a question that made no sense at the time. "Did you check where?" I said. "Check where?" I scrolled back through every single email he had ever sent me, my eyes scanning the text until they blurred. And then I found it. In an email from the week of his birthday, a message I had received the day after Mom had forbidden me from visiting him. I must have been too heartbroken and angry to read it thoroughly. Buried in a paragraph about how much he missed me, he'd written, "Go up to the attic. Behind the old radiator. There's something there for you." I made a mental note, a big one, and waited. My chance came the next week, when Mom and Brandon went on a date night. As soon as their car pulled out of the driveway, I was scrambling for the attic. My hands shook as I pulled down the rickety ladder and climbed into the dusty, suffocating darkness, armed with only my phone's flashlight. Behind the hulking, cold radiator, tucked into a space between the wall and the pipes, I found it. A journal, wrapped tightly in plastic. I tore it open to the page he'd marked with a folded corner. It was dated just weeks before his arrest. In my dad's familiar, steady handwriting, it said, "It's been a few weeks since I saw Lauren and Brandon sneaking out of the bar together after her shift. I don't know how to confront her. Something isn't right." My breath hitched. Lauren was my mom's name. He knew. He knew they were having an affair. And just as that realization hit me, I heard it. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My blood ran cold. They were back early. The restaurant must have been too crowded, or maybe they'd had a fight. I could hear car doors slamming and my mom's heels clicking on the walkway below. My heart hammered against my ribs as I clutched the journal to my chest, my mind racing. I heard Brandon's heavy, angry footsteps on the stairs. Each creak of the old would send a jolt of pure adrenaline through me. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped my phone, its flashlight beam dancing wildly across the dusty attic floorboards. I shoved the journal under my shirt, the cold leather a shock against my skin, and scrambled toward the attic opening. But I was too slow. Brandon's had appeared through the square hole in the ceiling just as I reached the ladder. His dark, predatory eyes immediately locked onto mine. He stared at me for a long, silent moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Then, he climbed the rest of the way up, his broad shoulders barely fitting through the opening. I backed away until my back hit the rough wood of the far wall, the journal pressing painfully into my stomach. He looked around the attic slowly, deliberately, taking in the disturbed dust motes hanging in the air, the boxes I'd shifted near the radiator. "What are you doing up here?" he asked. His voice was calm, but it had an edge to it, a tightly controlled rage that was far more terrifying than yelling. "I was looking for my old stuffed animals," I stammered, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "From when I was little." He didn't believe me. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands flexed into fists at his sides. He stepped closer, and I could smell the wine on his breath, mixed with that expensive cologne Mom loved, the one that always made me feel sick. "You're a terrible liar," he said, his voice low. "Just like your father." The words hit me like a slap. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard, and yanked me toward the ladder. I had to use my other hand to hold the journal in place under my shirt. Mom was waiting at the bottom, her arms crossed, her foot tapping an impatient rhythm on the floor. "Why are you sneaking around like some kind of thief in your own house?" she demanded, her voice sharp with annoyance. Brandon didn't let go of my arm. "She was hiding something," he said, his eyes glinting. "We should search a room." Panic flared in my chest. "I just wanted to find my old teddy bear." I blurted out, the words tumbling out too fast. "I can't sleep without my door." It was a stupid, desperate lie, but Mom, probably too tired and annoyed to deal with any more drama, seemed to buy it. She just rolled her eyes and told me to go to my room. That night, I waited until their snores filled the house, a dissonant duet of Brandon's deep rumble and Mom's softer breathing. I carefully slid the journal out from under my shirt and hid it inside my pillowcase, the sharp corners digging into my cheek as I tried to sleep. I couldn't risk reading any more of it, not with Brandon's shadow appearing in my doorway every hour like a malevolent clockwork ghost. The next morning, Mom made pancakes, humming off-key, acting as if nothing had happened. The forced normalcy of it was nauseating. Brandon just stared at me across the table, his eyes tracking my every move. I excused myself to use the bathroom and took the journal with me. I found a plastic bag under the sink, wrapped the journal in it, and hid it in the cold, dark water of the toilet tank. On Monday at school, I snuck into the computer lab during lunch. The room was empty, humming with the sound of old desktops. I took out the journal and, with shaking hands, started taking photos of every single page with my phone. The entries went back years, my dad's familiar script growing more frantic and worried as the dates progressed. He wrote about seeing Brandon's car parked down the street at odd hours. He wrote about Mom acting distant and secretive. One entry described finding a receipt for a motel in her purse. Another talked about how Brandon had started showing up at the bar during Dad's shifts, just watching him from a corner booth, lurking like a predator. I uploaded every photo to a new, anonymous cloud account, my heart pounding with every percentage point of the progress bar. Then I triple deleted the photos from my phone. I knew Brandon might check it. He'd been going through my things more and more lately. And I was right. When I got home that afternoon, he was waiting in my room, sitting on my bed like he owned it. My room was destroyed. My drawers were dumped out. My mattress was flipped over. My cheap jewelry box was emptied. "Where is it?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I played dumb, but he wasn't buying it. He grabbed my shoulders and shook me hard. "I know you found something in the attic," he hissed. "I'm not stupid." Mom came home then, her keys jingling. Brandon's entire demeanor shifted in an instant. He became calm, helpful, concerned. He told her he was just helping me reorganize my messy room, that I'd asked for his help. He even smiled that fake, dead-eyed smile. And she believed him, because it was easier. That night at dinner, Brandon announced they were moving up the wedding. It wouldn't be next year, it would be next month. "I just can't wait to make our family official," he said, reaching across the table to squeeze Mom's hand. She squealed with delight. I felt like I was going to be sick. The next few weeks were a prison. Brandon installed a security camera in the hallway, pointing right at my doorless frame, its little red light blinking at me all night. He drove me to and from school, cutting me off from my friends. He took my phone every night, but he couldn't watch me every second of the day. At school, I printed out pages from the journal and hid them in my locker. I needed help, but I didn't know who to trust. Then I remembered Uncle Henry. He was my dad's best friend since high school, the kind of loyal, no-nonsense guy who was basically family. Mom had banned him from our lives after the arrest, calling him a bad influence. The truth was, she was afraid of his loyalty to my dad. I found his number in an old address book and called him from a payphone at school. When he heard my voice, his gruff tone softened. I told him everything, the words spilling out in a rush. He listened patiently, and then he said, "Meet me at the public library after school tomorrow. We're going to fix this." That meeting was the beginning of our own secret investigation. I showed him the photos of the journal. His face grew darker with every page. "I always knew something was off," he muttered, his knuckles white on the steering wheel of his old pickup. He said we needed more than just Dad's suspicions. We needed hard evidence. Uncle Henry started tracking down people who worked at the bar that night. He found Edward, the security guard, who remembered seeing Brandon go into the bathroom just seconds before my dad. He found Caroline, the bartender, who remembered Brandon hanging around for weeks beforehand, asking weirdly specific questions about my dad's schedule. The real breakthrough came from Brian, the bar manager. He mentioned they had a backup security system the police hadn't known about, one that recorded the hallway leading to the bathrooms. He still had the files on an old hard drive. We watched the footage at Brian's house, and there it was, clear as day. The timestamp showed Brandon entering the bathroom at 9:47 p.m. He comes out 4 minutes later, at 9:51, checking his watch. My dad enters at 9:52. And at 9:53, Dad stumbles out, covered in blood, screaming for help. It was the proof we needed. Brandon had been in there, alone, with the victim. Uncle Henry told me to act normal at home, but Brandon must have sensed something was up. One night, he cornered me in my room and told me he knew I'd been meeting with Uncle Henry. He threatened my mom, his voice casual as he described all the accidents that could happen. I told Uncle Henry we needed to move faster. He'd already shown our evidence to Dad's lawyer, who said we needed the original journal to make the case airtight. I knew I had to get it. That night, at 3 a.m., I crept to the bathroom and retrieved the journal from the toilet tank. But when I came out, Brandon was standing there, a shadow in the hallway. I managed to lie my way back to my room, but the next morning, my backpack was gone. I found it in the kitchen, its contents spread across the table. Brandon was sitting there, flipping through the journal. He told Mom I'd written it, that it was all part of a sick, elaborate fantasy to break them up. And she believed him. She told me I was disturbed and that I was being sent away to a special boarding school on Monday. A school 1,000 miles away, with no phones and no outside contact. It was his checkmate. On Saturday morning, while Brandon was in the shower, I slipped out and ran to Ashley's house. I called Uncle Henry, my voice shaking. "He's sending me away. On Monday." "Pack a bag," Henry said, his voice grim. "Meet me at the library in an hour." But when I got back home, Brandon was waiting on the front porch. He dragged me inside by my hair. And with my mom still out, he started talking, ranting, confessing. He said he'd planned it for months. He said my mom was weak and easy to manipulate. He told me he'd gone into the bathroom to plan a knife to frame Dad, but the victim had seen him and he'd had to improvise. He bragged about how he'd pocketed the real murder weapon in the chaos and left a decoy. He talked about marrying my mom for the life insurance, about how much I'd be worth if something happened to her, too. And I was recording everything. I had pressed the record button on Ashley's phone in my pocket before I even walked in the door. And that's when my mom walked in. She'd forgotten her wallet. She stood in the doorway, a bag of groceries in her arms, and she heard everything. The bag dropped, oranges rolling across the floor. Her face went white. Brandon spun around, his own face a mask of horror as he realized he'd been caught. He tried to backtrack, but the spell was broken. Mom grabbed a kitchen knife from the block and told him to get out. He laughed at her. Then he saw the look in her eyes and realized she was serious. Before he left, he threatened her, told her he'd destroy her reputation if she went to the police. Then he was gone. Mom collapsed, sobbing. I showed her the recording. She listened to his cold, calculating voice describe his plans for her, for me, and something in her finally shattered for good. I called Uncle Henry. He came over with the bar footage. We sat her down and showed her everything. The journal, the video, the witness statements. The truth, in all its ugly, undeniable detail. She finally called the police. They put out a warrant for Brandon, but he'd already vanished. They found him the next day at a motel 2 towns over. He'd kept the real murder weapon all this time, a sick trophy hidden in his car. With the knife, the recording of his confession, and the security footage, the case against him was ironclad. He confessed to everything, including other crimes in other states. My dad's lawyer filed for an emergency appeal, and the judge ordered his immediate release. After 8 long, agonizing months, my dad was coming home. Picking him up from the prison was the most surreal experience of my life. He looked thinner, older, but when he saw me, his eyes lit up in the same old way. We just held each other and cried. The first few weeks were awkward. Dad slept on the couch. Mom moved out to a small apartment across town. The divorce papers were signed a month later. She gave Dad everything. The house, the car, full custody of me. Her guilt was a tangible thing, a heavy shroud she wore everywhere. Brandon's trial was a formality. The jury found him guilty on all counts. Life without parole. As they led him away, he looked at me one last time, and I stared back, refusing to let him see anything but the strength he had failed to break. Life slowly found a new normal. Dad and I became a team. He started working construction with Uncle Henry. He met Caroline, the bartender who testified for us. She was funny and kind and made him laugh again, a real laugh that reached his eyes. She never tried to be my mom, she just became my friend. I started seeing a therapist who helped me understand that none of it was my fault. Mom sent letters for a while, but I threw them away. Maybe someday I'll be able to forgive her, but not yet. Some betrayals cut too deep. A year after the trial, Dad got a settlement from the state for his wrongful imprisonment. It was enough to secure our future, to ensure I could go to college without worrying. I decided to study criminal justice. I wanted to help other families who had been torn apart by lies. The night before I left for college, Dad and I sat on the porch swing, just like we used to. He told me he was proud of me, that I had saved his life. I told him that I always knew he was innocent and that he was the best dad a girl could ask for. We had survived. We were broken in some places, but we had put ourselves back together, stronger than before. We were free.